The dining room was the largest in the house, stretching wide with polished floors and a long oak table that could seat 12. Yet every evening, only one chair was pulled out. The rich man sat there, his silverware perfectly aligned, his meal carefully prepared, but the silence pressed heavier than the weight of the chandeliers above. He had built his fortune with precision and discipline, climbing step after step until he owned everything others once told him he couldn't. But when the plates were set, there was no one to pass the bread to, no hand reaching for the glass he filled. What remained was a hollow echo of cutlery against porcelain, a rhythm that reminded him each night of what was missing. Neighbors often caught glimpses of him through the wide windows. Some envied his mansion, the expensive cars parked outside, and the life that seemed untouchable. But no one knew the burden he carried when the front doors closed. His phone never rang with the warmth of a son's voice, nor did laughter spill through the rooms. He had once believed he had time, that family ties could wait until after the next deal, the next contract. Now the waiting had stretched into years. Sometimes he would pause mid-meal, his fork suspended in the air, and memories would rise uninvited. His late wife's laughter at that same table, the evenings when their daughter ran barefoot across the floor, begging for one more story before bed. The house had been alive then, filled with chaos and warmth, but choices made in pursuit of wealth had driven them apart. His wife had passed on years ago, and his daughter no longer called. He tried to bury the ache beneath routine. Each evening was the same, a meal too large for one, followed by a glass of wine he finished slowly, staring into the stillness. The garden outside bloomed beautifully, cared for by hired hands, but he had never sat among the flowers himself. The library shelves were lined with books unopened for years, and paintings worth fortunes hung unadmired. All of it was abundance without meaning, like gold locked in a chest at the bottom of the sea. There were nights when he wondered if anyone would notice should he fail to appear at the table. He told himself his success was enough, that he needed no one, yet the silence argued otherwise. Wealth had given him comfort, but it had stolen the very thing comfort was meant to hold connection. The world saw him as a man who had everything, but as he swallowed the last bite alone, he knew better. What he truly owned was not riches, but emptiness disguised in luxury. He lived in the modest house just beyond the gate, a place the rich man had barely noticed before. The neighbor held a small basket of bread. He explained it was fresh from his oven, still warm, and he thought it might be nice to share. The rich man hesitated. His instinct was to refuse politely, to retreat into the walls of his solitude. But something about the neighbor's smile, gentle and unhurried, made him nod. The next evening, as he sat once again at his enormous table, he found himself thinking about the neighbor. He wondered how someone with so little seemed to carry such ease in his presence. At first, the neighbor simply offered to share a cup of tea. The rich man declined more than once, claiming busyness, though his evenings were always empty. Eventually, curiosity overcame him. He accepted what he found was astonishingly simple: a small wooden table, chipped cups, and a meal of stew that filled the air with warmth. Yet sitting across from someone, listening to stories, and even being teased for eating too slowly awakened something dormant within him. He realized then that meals did not need extravagance, they needed presence. The laughter of a friend could fill a room more completely than chandeliers. The clinking of humble dishes felt louder than the silence of gold-plated cutlery. As the days turned into weeks, he began to notice things he had ignored. Families walking together in the park, children calling to their parents from bicycles, even the quiet companionship of two elderly people sitting side by side on a bench. These were things money could never buy. Still, pride lingered in him like a shadow. He found it difficult to admit aloud how much he longed for that same connection. He wore his wealth like armor, fearful of showing the emptiness beneath. Yet each evening he spent with his neighbor chipped away at that armor, reminding him that perhaps it was never strength at all, but a cage he had built around himself. The turning point came on a rainy evening. The storm rattled the windows of the grand house, and as thunder rolled across the sky, he found himself pacing through the halls. He paused at the long dining table, the solitary chair waiting for him as always. The emptiness seemed unbearable, as if the storm outside had seeped into the silence within. For the first time, he pushed the chair back in and walked away without touching his dinner. Instead, he stepped into the rain and crossed the narrow lane to his neighbor's modest home. When the door opened, the neighbor looked surprised, then smiled with the same warmth as always. Without a word, he invited him in. The table inside was already set with 2 bowls of soup, steam rising gently into the air. It was as though the neighbor had been waiting, as though he knew this night would come. They ate together in quiet companionship. Between spoonfuls, the rich man felt the tightness in his chesties. The neighbor shared another story of his late wife, how she used to leave little notes tucked into his coat pocket, reminders of love in small gestures. The rich man sat still, realizing how long it had been since anyone had cared enough to leave him even the smallest token of affection. When the meal ended, he surprised himself by speaking. His voice cracked as he confessed how he had pushed his daughter away, how his endless pursuit of wealth had cost him not only her presence, but his own sense of belonging. The words were heavy, yet releasing them felt like dropping a stone he had carried for decades. The neighbor listened without judgment. His only reply was gentle. "It is never too late to choose differently." Those words settled deep inside him, like seeds waiting to grow. In the weeks that followed, he began to change. He no longer ate at the vast empty table, but often joined his neighbor for simple meals. He found himself reaching for his phone, not to check business figures, but to dial his daughter's number. At first, she did not answer, but he kept trying, leaving messages filled with apologies instead of excuses. Slowly, the silence began to break. One afternoon, she returned his call. Her voice trembled with caution, but it was a bridge fragile yet real. For the first time in years, hope stirred in him. He realized wealth had given him everything except what mattered most. Now, sitting across from a humble neighbor with nothing to prove, he understood that richness was not measured in what one could buy, but in the people who filled your life with meaning. When he looked around his house again, it felt different. The walls no longer echoed with emptiness. The heavy table still stretched across the dining room, but he knew it would not remain lonely forever. He had discovered true riches, the warmth of a voice, the comfort of shared bread, and the chance to begin again. If this story touched you, I invite you to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories that inspire reflection and growth, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your presence here is part of what makes these stories meaningful.